Imagine waking up to find elite military forces swarming your home, all because you went fishing on your own land. This isn't some Hollywood movie. This is exactly what happened to John Carrey, a retired veteran who found himself in a bureaucratic nightmare that eventually led to armed Navy SEALs storming his property at dawn. His crime? Fishing in a lake he'd owned for over 40 years. Today, I'm going to take you through this shocking true story that raises serious questions about property rights, government overreach, and the unexpected consequences of environmental regulations gone wrong. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a simple fishing trip turned into a full-blown military operation, and why this case should concern every American landowner. John Carrey's day started like any other. At 67 years old, the Vietnam veteran had settled into a peaceful retirement on his 88-acre property in rural Michigan. The land had been in his family for generations, passed down from his grandfather who purchased it back in 1952. The crowning jewel of the property was a pristine 8-acre lake that John had personally maintained and stocked with fish for decades. Fishing wasn't just a hobby for John, it was a way of life. Every morning he would wake up at dawn, grab his tackle box, and head down to the lake. The routine was therapeutic, helping him manage the PTSD he'd struggled with since returning from war. The lake was his sanctuary, his piece of paradise. But on that fateful morning in May 2023, John's peaceful routine was shattered. As he cast his line into the still waters, he noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parking near his driveway. Two men in suits approached him, identifying themselves as agents from the Environmental Protection Agency. "Sir, you're in violation of federal law," one of the agents informed him. "This body of water falls under the Clean Water Act, and you need permits to fish here." John was confused. This was his lake on his property. He'd been fishing here for decades without issue. He tried explaining this to the agents, showing them his property deed that clearly included the lake within his land boundaries. "The regulations changed last year," the agent explained. "This lake has been reclassified as a water of the United States because it eventually connects to a creek that feeds into the Manistee River, which is navigable water under federal jurisdiction." John couldn't believe what he was hearing. His small lake, which he'd personally dug deeper and maintained for years, was now suddenly government property. The agents issued him a cease and desist order, along with a $20,000 fine for unauthorized fishing, and warned him not to access the lake again until he obtained the proper permits. For John, this was beyond absurd. The lake wasn't just any body of water, it was his livelihood and passion. Over the years, he'd invested thousands of dollars stocking it with bass, bluegill, and rainbow trout. He'd built a small dock, kept the shoreline clear, and even implemented his own conservation measures to ensure the health of the ecosystem. Frustrated but not wanting to escalate the situation, John decided to seek legal advice. He contacted Tom Williams, a local attorney who specialized in property rights. Williams was immediately concerned by what he heard. "This is a classic case of regulatory overreach," Williams told John after reviewing the documents. "The definition of waters of the United States has been a contentious issue for years, but claiming jurisdiction over a private lake like yours is pushing the boundaries of the law." Williams advised John to file an appeal and request a hearing with the EPA. In the meantime, he recommended that John comply with the order to avoid further penalties. Reluctantly, John agreed. For the next 2 weeks, he stayed away from his beloved lake, watching it from his porch with a sense of loss and anger growing inside him. The appeal process was slow and frustrating. John filled out countless forms, submitted detailed surveys of his property, and provided historical documentation showing that the lake had been privately owned and maintained for generations. But weeks passed without any response from the agency. As summer approached, John's patience wore thin. The trout he'd stocked needed to be harvested before the water temperatures rose too high, or they would die off. After repeatedly trying to contact the EPA for an expedited decision and receiving no response, John made a fateful decision. "I'm going fishing on my own dam lake," he told his neighbor, Mike Peterson. "If they want to find me again, so be it, but I'm not letting those fish go to waste." Next morning, John returned to his ritual. The familiar feel of his fishing rod in his hands brought a sense of normalcy back to his world. He caught several rainbow trout and considered it a successful day. What he didn't know was that someone had reported his activity to the EPA. 3 days later, John received a letter informing him that he was now facing criminal charges for violating the Clean Water Act. The potential penalties included up to 3 years in prison and fines of up to $100,000. The letter ordered him to appear in federal court the following month. The news hit John like a ton of bricks. Prison time? For fishing on his own property, it seemed unbelievable. The story quickly spread through the small community, and many of John's neighbors rallied to his support. "This isn't just about John," Mike Peterson told the local newspaper. "This is about every American's right to use their own land. If they can take away John's lake today, whose property rights will they violate tomorrow? The case caught the attention of the Pacific Legal Foundation, a nonprofit organization that defends Americans against government overreach. They offered to represent John pro bono, seeing his case as an important test of the limits of the Clean Water Act. The EPA's interpretation of waters of the United States has expanded to the point of absurdity, explained Sarah Johnson, the attorney assigned to John's case. A private lake with at best a tenuous connection to navigable waters should not fall under federal jurisdiction. While the legal battle was brewing, John continued to defy the order. He believed strongly that he was in the right, and his military background had instilled in him a deep sense of fighting for what he believed in. Every morning, he would go fishing, sometimes catching enough to share with neighbors or donate to the local food bank. The EPA officials were aware of his ongoing violations, but seemed hesitant to escalate further while the legal challenge was pending. However, unbeknownst to John, they were building a case against him, documenting each instance of his defiance with photographs taken by agents parked on public roads near his property. As the court date approached, John received a surprising visit from a local historian who had been researching the area's water systems. The historian, Dr. Amanda Chen, had discovered old maps and geological surveys that proved John's lake was completely man-made, created by his grandfather in the 1950s by damming a natural spring on the property. "This changes everything," Sarah Johnson explained when John shared the information. "If the lake is artificial and was legally created before the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, it should be exempt from EPA jurisdiction under the Act's grandfather clause." Armed with this new evidence, John's legal team filed for an immediate dismissal of the charges. They were confident that this discovery would end the legal nightmare once and for all. But the EPA wasn't backing down. They argued that regardless of the lake's origin, its current connection to the watershed meant it fell under their authority. They also claimed that modifications John had made to the lake over the years constituted new construction, voiding any grandfather protection. The case was becoming increasingly complex, with both sides digging in their heels. Meanwhile, John's health began to suffer from the stress. His blood pressure rose to dangerous levels, and his PTSD symptoms, which had been largely under control for years, returned with a vengeance. "I never thought I'd have to fight my own government again," he told Mike during a particularly difficult day. "I did my duty in Vietnam, and this is how they repay me." The situation took an unexpected turn when a whistleblower from within the EPA leaked internal documents to John's legal team. The documents revealed that the agency was using John's case as a test to establish broader control over private water bodies nationwide. There were even memos discussing the publicity value of prosecuting a defiant landowner to send a message to others. Sarah Johnson immediately filed a motion for dismissal based on prosecutorial misconduct. The judge, troubled by the leaked documents, ordered both parties to appear for an emergency hearing. During the hearing, the EPA's representatives were put on the defensive. They claimed the leaked documents were taken out of context and denied any improper motivations. However, the judge was skeptical and ordered a full review of the agency's handling of the case. While the legal proceedings continued, John's story caught the attention of national media. Conservative outlets portrayed him as a patriot standing against government tyranny, while progressive publications focused on the importance of environmental regulations to protect water quality downstream. The case became a lightning rod in the ongoing debate about the proper balance between individual rights and environmental protection. Local veterans groups organized rallies in support of John, and a GoFundMe campaign to help with his legal expenses quickly raised over $50,000. The attention brought pressure on local politicians to intervene, but they were hesitant to challenge federal authority. Then came the morning that would shock the nation. It was 5:30 a.m. when John was awakened by the sound of helicopters overhead. Looking out his window, he saw what appeared to be a military operation unfolding on his property. Men in tactical gear were approaching his house from multiple directions, while others had taken positions around the lake. John's first thought was that he was having a PTSD episode, a flashback to his time in Vietnam. But the pounding on his door was very real. When he opened it, he found himself facing armed agents in body armor. "John Carrey, we have a warrant to search these premises and seize evidence related to Clean Water Act violations," announced the lead agent, handing him a document. John was stunned. The show of force seemed wildly disproportionate to the alleged offense. As he later learned, the raid involved agents from the EPA's Environmental Crimes Section, supported by local police, and most surprisingly, a small team of Navy SEALs who were allegedly there for specialized water operations support. The presence of Navy SEALs in a domestic law enforcement action raised serious legal questions. The Posse Comitatus Act generally prohibits using military personnel to enforce domestic laws. Later investigations would reveal that the SEALs were ostensibly there for training purposes and to help collect water samples from parts of the lake that were difficult to access, a paper-thin justification that wouldn't hold up to scrutiny. For hours, agents combed through John's property, taking water and soil samples, photographing the lake from every angle, and seizing his fishing equipment as evidence. They even confiscated his computer and phone, claiming they needed to review his communications for evidence of environmental crimes. Throughout the ordeal, John sat on his porch, watched by armed guards. The scene was surreal: military helicopters hovering over a peaceful lake, armed men in tactical gear collecting water samples, all because an old veteran wanted to fish on his own property. News of the raid spread quickly. Neighbors gathered at the edge of John's property, held back by police barricades. Some brought American flags and signs supporting John. Local news crews arrived to capture the scene, and by afternoon, the images were playing on national television. The backlash was immediate and intense. Veterans' organizations expressed outrage at the treatment of one of their own. Civil liberties groups questioned the legality of the raid. Politicians from both parties called for investigations into the use of military personnel and the apparent excessive force. The governor of Michigan issued a statement calling the raid a disproportionate response that raises serious concerns about federal overreach. Even the Secretary of Defense claimed to have been unaware of the SEAL team's involvement and ordered an immediate review of the operation. Facing mounting public pressure, the EPA director held a press conference defending the agency's actions. He claimed that John had not only violated the Clean Water Act, but had also potentially endangered downstream communities by introducing non-native fish species into the watershed without proper permits. "We understand that the optics of this operation are concerning to many Americans," the director acknowledged. "But environmental crimes can have serious consequences for public health and safety, and we must enforce the law." Few were convinced by this explanation. The seemingly excessive force used against a 67-year-old veteran over fishing rights struck many Americans as the definition of government overreach. The fact that military personnel had been involved only amplified these concerns. In the days following the raid, John's attorney filed an emergency motion challenging the legality of the search and seizure. The judge, clearly troubled by the use of military forces, ordered an immediate hearing and temporarily blocked the EPA from using any evidence collected during the raid. During the hearing, the government's case began to unravel. It became clear that the EPA had misrepresented the urgency of the situation to obtain the search warrant. The alleged risk to downstream water systems was based on theoretical models rather than actual evidence, and the claimed connection between John's Lake and navigable waters was tenuous at best. Most damaging to the government's case was testimony from one of the agents involved in the raid, who admitted under oath that the decision to bring in Navy SEALs was primarily motivated by a desire to send a message to other landowners who might challenge EPA authority. The judge's ruling was scathing. She not only threw out all evidence from the raid, but also dismissed the entire case against John with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be filed again. In her written opinion, she called the EPA's actions a troubling abuse of power and referred the matter to the Department of Justice for a potential investigation into civil rights violations. For John, the victory was bittersweet. While he had won his legal battle and could finally return to fishing his lake without fear of prosecution, the ordeal had taken a toll. His health had deteriorated, and the stress had brought back nightmares he hadn't experienced in decades. "I fought for this country because I believed in freedom," John told reporters after the ruling. "I never imagined I'd have to fight my own government for the right to use my own property." The case sparked a national conversation about the scope of environmental regulations and property rights. Congress held hearings on EPA enforcement practices, and several lawmakers introduced bills to more clearly define waters of the United States and limit federal jurisdiction over private water bodies. In the aftermath, John became an unlikely symbol of resistance against government overreach. He received thousands of letters of support from across the country, and veterans groups honored him for once again standing up for American principles, this time on the home front. The EPA faced significant reforms. The director resigned under pressure, and new guidelines were implemented requiring multi-level review for any enforcement actions involving private property. The Department of Defense tightened restrictions on the use of military personnel in domestic law enforcement operations. John's Lake remains his sanctuary. On clear mornings, you can still find him there with his fishing rod, enjoying the peace and quiet he fought so hard to preserve. But now, his story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting individual rights against government overreach. For other property owners facing similar challenges, John offers simple advice. Know your rights, document everything, and don't back down when you know you're right. This is America. The government works for us, not the other way around. The battle over John Carrey's lake may have ended, but the larger fight for property rights and reasonable environmental regulation continues. His case set important legal precedents that will help protect landowners for generations to come. As Americans, we all want clean water and a healthy environment. But as John's story teaches us, we must be careful not to sacrifice essential liberties in pursuit of these goals. The proper balance between individual rights and environmental protection remains one of the most important challenges facing our nation. If this story of government overreach concerned you, hit subscribe now, because next week, I'm covering how another homeowner found himself facing jail time for collecting rainwater on his own property. You won't want to miss it.